is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Book 3 in the Children of Divinity series, Ascend, chapters 15.5 through 17. Through 17, everybody. Don't make the mistake I did last time. In these chapters, we get to see a little bit more about how Brian is dealing with his transformation, and Cassidy comes from McIntyre's ass. His entire ass. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. Heather is here in the chat. Yay. So, all right, we're going to talk about Brian. Let's talk about Brian. What's sort of interesting to me, and I feel like this just says a lot more about me, is when we go to Brian here, and he is, first of all, dealing with the fact that she has this massive fucking husband who doesn't know how to deal with his own powers. She thinks about the fact that, and it says, he had been trying to force her into his bed. She couldn't even, make herself sound out the other word. And when I read this, I will tell you guys what. It's not that she's clearly not wrong, and neither is Jill, with Jill bringing up the issues that she does later, where Jill is basically like, you're just being repeatedly drugged. And the fact that you're enjoying being repeatedly drugged doesn't change that that's what's happening, which means that this is coercion, which is super not okay. She's right. But I think that in a lot of my shows, I have made it clear that one of my kinks is a guy who really is going for it. And so throughout that scene, I probably should have been having a different reaction than I did. Because for me, I was like, ooh, Brian, all right, what's up? And that's my bad. Look, I stand by it because that's my thing. And obviously, as we see later, Jordan's aware that this is what's going on and still is going for it. The sex is better than it's ever been is the way that she is thinking about it. But the concerns that Jill is bringing up are totally valid. It's just because of the fact that the pheromones are working on Jordan in that previous scene, so that her brain is kind of mixed up and part of her wants to. I wasn't thinking about it in terms of she wants to because she's being drugged, essentially. I was just thinking about it in terms of she wants to, but she's also afraid of this guy and what he's potentially capable of. That was my main concern, was his abilities are still a complete unknown when he shows up. So her kind of resisting and not wanting to, it felt like she was much more resisting with a sense of being unsure of herself, because she wanted to feel safe with Brian because it's Brian, even though it's not the Brian that she used to know. And there was almost a guilt surrounding not feeling safe with him the way she had once. And instead, I should have been thinking about it as her feeling unsafe because she's sensing the effect that his pheromones are having on her, and she's aware that this is not a natural response that she's having. So it's really hard because the reason that Brian did all of this, underwent all of this horrific, like, I say horrific. It doesn't sound like, he doesn't say anything about the process of it being torturous or anything. You really get the sense that he just doesn't really remember a lot of it, which is kind of great, I guess. But the reason that he did this to himself was because he wanted his wife to feel more connected to him. He didn't want to be seen as dead weight or weak. He wanted to be able to compete with Jason. And he wanted Jordan to respect him as a man in a way that he felt he wasn't getting because she was surrounded by other hyperpowered people. And unfortunately, everything that Brian wanted is what he's getting. Right? Like, if you look at the surface, it really looks like this has paid off, you know? She is so drawn to him that Jason kind of falls by the wayside, and it's not like she's not still attracted to Jason, but it's not the same as it was, where her brain would basically like scramble when she was near him. And the one thing that I'll say might not be quite what he wants. He didn't want to be dead weight. And I won't say that he is dead weight, but because he is so out of control of himself and unable to manage his temper and the spikes of adrenaline and other hormones that happen whenever he has a strong emotional reaction to things, it is definitely causing him to be like a liability instead of the help that he was hoping he would be. And also, he saw how afraid of him she was, and that bothers him. Like, the moment at one point when he says, "I don't want you to ever be afraid of me again," he means that. And you see, like, Jill sort of look curiously at Jordan because she is aware, I think, of what that probably means. And that is part of why I think that she's, like, kind of getting in Jordan's face later on about the fact that she's basically being drugged. Because she's like, I know that you didn't say that this is what happened, but it is very strongly implied that he almost raped you, and I am going to fucking not be cool with that. Whether you love this guy or not, I hope you know that. I can't be mad at Jill for that. That is the right attitude to have, like, 100%. So, I just wanted to address, you know, my reaction to this versus what the reaction probably should have been. Because I, unfortunately, have fallen prey to that thing that anybody who basically, like, was attracted to the overall concept of, like, Edward Cullen in Twilight, essentially, where it's like, oh, he's dangerous. He's so dangerous that he might hurt you, but he won't hurt you because he likes you, but, like, he could. That's, like, what we're dancing around here. And it's being treated in a much more adult, responsible, sane way than it is in any of those stories, because those are for titillation. So what I'm saying, Heather, is tell your husband I'm going to be writing a fanfic. And it's going to be something. So, okay, back to what we're getting into here. She's telling him about what Spears was doing. And they get right to it. I was really surprised. We go right from her saying, we'll get through this, to her explaining absolutely everything. And we get a little information from her that we didn't have ourselves before either. She says, Interpol, MI6, and the CIA have been through every one of his offices and residences. They found pictures from his charity work that show children that were recovered from his Redmond facility. There are dozens unaccounted for still. Yeah, that tracks. So it's all these kids that he had like a photo op with, talking about how generous he's being, and then he takes them into his creepy basement and just performs experiments on them. Yeah, that sounds on brand. And Brian, in response to what Jordan's telling him, because he's getting worked on by Jill while they're having this combo, says, "That bastard." And it says the sound made Jill jump. And she scooted back down to give her brother-in-law a moment. He stared down at her and his voice softened. "I'm sorry, Jill." "It's okay. You should keep yourself level, though. Your adrenaline levels jump up quickly when you get agitated. That's triggering other hormonal secretions that I'm still trying to work out. I've never seen so much going on in a body chemically." And he says that his emotional reaction to everything feels a lot stronger than it was, and that he doesn't remember leaving Dr. Spears' place. He says, "I just woke up in the water and was dazed for a few days." And she's like, "Yeah, well, you had a lot done to you." And she says that you have organs I don't recognize, which I'm pretty sure that I'm not positive about this. And I don't know if we get a straight answer to this at some point, so maybe Heather won't be able to sort of tell me directly the answer, and I just have to sort of wait and see. But when she says you have organs I don't recognize, my assumption here is that basically Spears injects him with something that triggers the body to create these organs. This is not like a Frankenstein situation where he had organs on hand that he cuts Brian open and like patches into his system, right? This is supposed to be an evolution that his body is going through on its own in response to a stimulus that it was exposed to, right? Okay. Heather's saying that's right. Okay, good. So the idea that there's just like fucking new organs. What? What? Like, what do they do? What is that? I am dying to know. And the fact that Jill is so flummoxed, it's really interesting to see. Jill and Ryan, their specialties, are dealing with the computers and the human body, and each of them running up against something that they're just like, what is this? Because they're dealing with an alien and his alien tech. So it makes total sense, but it's just really kind of fun to watch them be completely stumped. And what is going on with him, because it was like unnaturally triggered, it isn't going to be, first of all, it's a very sudden shock on his system. All of these changes did not come upon him gradually, like it did for Jordan and her sisters, where they grow up and slowly begin to learn that they can do things and figure out how to control them. This happened literally overnight. And also, there's just a sense of, I am not entirely sure how much Dr. Spears knew exactly what was going to happen to Brian either. I am certain that he had some idea. There were things that he was like purposely attempting based on the fact that he asks Brian, "Do you want me to do this for you?" Which was the pheromone thing, I'm pretty certain at this point. But I don't know exactly how much Spears had like narrowed down how this worked. I'm not sure how precise it is. I don't know. And due to that, I'm really just wondering if there is going to be a way for Jill to beat him at his own game. If she's like observing Brian and figuring some of this out, is she going to be able to affect what Spears is attempting to do and thwart him in a way that Ryan was able to do with Jenna? I don't know how that would even work, but I'm just sort of thinking about it. So let's see. Jordan crossed over to Brian, and for the first time in her life, she felt hesitant to touch him. And they're talking about the pheromones, and Jill says they're controllable, I think, but they're also tied to emotional state. Aggression will trigger fear. Desire will trigger lust, and so on. I can't really give you more than that right now. And she tells Brian that he has to remain calm, and he asks how. And she says meditation, and he kind of goes, chill, like, come on. And I appreciated this. Jordan is like, no, that's true. And I cannot help but laugh because, oh man, y'all, how many of us have heard we should try meditation? And we just go, oh, yeah, helpful. Thank you for nothing. I am so guilty of this. I am so guilty of it. I mean, truly, I know how effective and helpful meditation can be. I have had firsthand experience. And yet, you try and suggest that I do it, and I will laugh in your face. Truly, it makes no sense. You know, it's kind of similar to the response that we all have where it's like, oh, you're not feeling well, you should eat more vegetables. And you just like kind of snort and go, I'm sure I should. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, okay, it's a fucking given that I should take better care of myself than I do. I know. And we all act like, yeah. But other than that, and it's like, unfortunately, that's actually not it. It's not other than that. That's it. And everything that we do that isn't that is just like buying time until the inevitable face the music moment where shit breaks down in a very big way. And that can be mental or physical, but it'll happen. So what I'm saying is, guys, make time to do some deep breathing in your day. It doesn't have to be a 10-minute meditation session. You don't need to get into the lotus position. But like, just to sit up straight, drop your shoulders, loosen your jaw, untense your hands, your spine, and you'll just feel all of a sudden like, oh, right. And it's wild. So, just saying, meditation works. It's just hard to make ourselves believe it because it feels so basic that it's almost completely overlooked in favor of like more complex or immediate solutions. So yeah, she says that she'll show him how to do that because she uses those kinds of mental exercises to keep herself focused. And then we go to Jason, and he's talking to Dr. Linden about the similarities between Tretyak and Brian. And he says, I haven't determined if he's able to transmit his abilities yet, which I was like, oh, fuck. It didn't even occur to me that that might be a possibility. Or maybe it did, and I mentioned that in some episode, but I don't think that I thought that would be possible with him. I think that I assumed being able to transfer ability was going to be solely something that Tretyak was able to do by virtue of whatever specifically he was like gifted with. And that Brian was just, that would be off the table. If he can transmit abilities, part of me is delighted and part of me is disgusted. Like, a part of me is like, that could be really, really useful since he seems to be making a fucking army for himself, as we see later, if they could build an army for themselves. But I know they wouldn't do that. You know, like, they wouldn't just bring a bunch of fucking military in and be like, we're going to let Brian inject you with his blood so that you can turn into a fucking hulking monster. They just like, that's not really how they work here. So as much as that feels appealing in a, sort of hypothetical sense, I don't see that happening. I may be wrong, but we'll see. So, the two of them are essentially like, and also Douglas is here, I should say. They're all just kind of overwhelmed at what this dude can do. And Douglas says, we need to keep an eye on Jordan. He could compromise her and she might not see it. Which was a really interesting, like, it didn't really occur to me that there may be lingering effects to the pheromone reaction that she has. And I should have known that because, like, when she just thinks about the way that things affected her with Tretyak, it's this like visceral memory. It's not even a memory. It feels like it's happens to her again when she remembers it. So obviously it does linger, but that's just so deeply inconvenient that I conveniently kind of ignored that that's a thing. So Ryan has put cameras on both of them to keep an eye out in case anything gets sort of like hinky between the two of them. And they just talk about like whether or not there'll be a point where Brian's abilities have sort of peaked and they know what he can do for sure. And Lyndon's like, nobody's ever really done evolving. They're in flux and they'll probably like slow and begin to normalize, but there's really no telling when that could happen. And then they start talking about training. And Douglas again says he needs control. Jordan isn't going to give him that, and I don't think we should overexpose her to him. But Jason is like, they're married, dude. Like, I know that you want to keep her, and I respect your concerns here because they are well-founded, but they're married, and she's a grown woman. You're not going to be able to keep her away from the husband that went missing. Like, that's not likely. And they just talk about like who is going to manage training him, and Jason wants to hand this over to Douglas. Actually, Ryan says that because Douglas, they're already friendly, and Brian has some trust in Douglas versus Jason, who he has this, this competition with. And later on, we see them training together. And while I definitely understand Ryan's point in terms of like Douglas's friendship with Brian being advantageous to the trust, a part of me feels like fighting Jason is more likely to mimic the response that he would have to an enemy in battle. If he's feeling too chill with Douglas, he will be unprepared in the field for the rush of like hatred and rage that will come when he's facing down somebody threatening Jordan potentially. And if he's practicing managing that response with Jason because he already sees him as a threat, I just think like as much as it will start off much more difficult, that is going to pay off more and be more helpful in the long term. And that's my like, it's a kind of thing where I understand not wanting to do it that way when he's so volatile right now. But at the same time, I feel it's sort of like, when you're like really out of shape and you have to start exercising again. And the urge that you have is to like go really, really hard because you're so out of shape that you feel like you need to sort of like make up for the time. You almost like you're punishing yourself. And really what you need to do is go extremely slowly and let yourself, because your body needs to like get used to this new state of things. But it's in the reverse because because of his hormones taking control of him the way that they do, his body doesn't respond in a normal way anymore. So I don't think easing him in will help. It feels like that's just putting off facing the inevitable of him losing it, because it's clearly something that is happening. He like breaks Chance's rib, as we find out later, or possibly ribs, plural, but I think it might just be the one. So anyway, we go from here to Spears. And it's been 6 months, as we find out. We do a jump ahead. And he is really, really happy. We get this bit here. It had been months since he had felt such a sense of enjoyment. 6 months and 14 days, the day he had gone down into the lab secreted below his house, had promised to be exceptional. Brian Agincourt was a crowning achievement in the evolution of his work. The irony of Jordan Law's own DNA being used to transform her husband was sweet and succulent, and he had meant to enjoy the chaos that followed. Then it had turned to ash in his mouth. And then we see that these are a bunch of awakened soldiers that he has collected from various areas of combat, military, the people who are familiar with combat enough that they wouldn't be coming into this absolutely cold, it seems like, but they certainly wouldn't be prepared for the kind of training that they are about to be pushed through. And he's watching this training, and it's interesting because it says that he felt a sense of enjoyment, but later on we pretty much get mostly dissatisfaction from him. He really thinks that things should be further along than they are, and he's really, really demanding about it with Tretyak. It says, Spears watched Tretyak's soldiers barking commands at the awakened men and women as they chased them through a grueling obstacle course made out of old tires, plywood, and battered cars that were more junk than conveyance. The Crimson Shark had promised that such mundane training would make his awakened elite strong of body as well as bond them to one another, both of which were essential to being competent in combat. And here it is. It took forever to break down the collection of former veterans, mercenaries, and hopeful youth. The only thing they all had in common was a hunger for the power Spears offered them and the fact that they were being hounded through their paces by some of the most fearsome warriors Earth had to offer. This batch was more competent than the last three. Every army needed fodder, Spears mused. So, yeah, this is when he's just basically starts arguing with Tretyak over how long it is taking. It has been 6 months. They should all be further along. Tretyak is like, I know what I'm doing. But he's getting very irritated, not only with Spears's mistrust in his methods, but just overall the sort of superciliousness and the condescension that Spears seems to bring to pretty much every conversation. And he says, he also tells him, your recruits are questionable. These have been the best so far. I really I'm assuming that he just means they're weaker than what he would have picked. He isn't good at recruiting. I would have loved to hear a little bit more about his opinion on that, because he's obviously extremely choosy. Looking at his team, the process for becoming one of them is very, very selective. You have to really go through it. And I'm going to guess Spears isn't really having that kind of discerning process. He's probably taking all the bodies he can. So, yeah, this is when he says, you hired me to make you warriors, not disposable lackeys. Warriors are forged. Lackeys are purchased. Money can't buy time. And he's like, I know that, but I expect you to speed up their training. And I'm like, you can't just say, yeah, you're right, and then completely sidestep the whole point that he was making, sir. That is not the way. But he wants what he wants when he wants it. And we get a bit of a moment where he's thinking about how he only has to suffer through dealing with Tretyak for a while longer, and then eventually he'll be put down. And I was really like, wait, you think you can put him down? Even, I really do want to know how he plans to do that. Because here's the thing. He is, I think, assuming that he can, go in and get his people that he has trained to be this, fighting force, that he can turn them in against Tretyak after the fact when it's convenient for him and he wants Tretyak out of the way. But Tretyak and his men are going to be the ones that trained them, which, you know, we're talking about bonding. I can't help but think they're going to feel more loyalty to Tretyak than they would to Spears. And maybe I'm just like, I have sort of a primitive understanding about how this would all work out, and it wouldn't be that simple. But I can't help but think Spears is thinking that they can just be like handed over to him and then he can program them to do what he wants. And I don't think it's going to be that simple. I don't know. There is potentially like something that is built into their wiring that he can control, whether it's like via pheromones or just something like there's potentially a switch that can be flipped and he can get them to completely zero in on him as their leader somehow. And if so, that's fine. But I just think he's got a really, like, if he wants this done in a way that they are loyal to him, he needs to be involved in a way I think that he isn't willing to commit to, because he doesn't want to put the time in, frankly. So I don't know. I'm just curious to see if that is going to go the way that he expects. So yeah, a couple of them have died during the training, to which Tretyak is like, yeah, well, they were weak. Their weakness killed them. Because he tries to say you killed them, and Tretyak's like, no. And he follows up with like, you know that they're expensive and time consuming to make. And Tretyak's just like, welp. And I enjoy very much watching Spears get irritated with all of the like perceived disrespect that he is getting from Tretyak. Because like, it's fun to see him be basically like given the fucking jerk off motion by somebody who could rip his entire head off. I just can't help but support whoever is giving him the jerk off motion. That feels like what he deserves. So, he gets into the car and Lena is waiting for him in the car and making him a drink. And there's this thing that he is thinking. So she's like not making eye contact. She's making him the drink. Her shoulders are slumped. And he thinks weakness. That won't do, Elgen thought, and wondered if he needed to give her another taste of his displeasure. Lena was turning out to be a disappointment. She could be corrected. He wasn't so certain about... she could be corrected. He wasn't so certain about his other failing servant. So when he says another taste of his displeasure, I'm assuming that he has been hitting her or doing something. And she has gotten cowed by him. And it's weird because it's like, I don't really know what he expected her response to be. In like response to being hit, of course, what people do is try to avoid being hit again. So whatever it was he was attempting, it's obviously not going the way that he wants. And he's just thinking, maybe I need to do it again. And I'm like, well, sir, just doesn't seem like he understands how to motivate people in a way that's like genuine, you know? And what exactly is he looking for in terms of like strength? Strength against what? Because, like, not against him, I'm certain. Like, he wouldn't want that. So I'm just very curious about what it is that he's even after in her behavior. So he pulls out his little computer. And this is really interesting. Let's see. For the next 20 minutes, he studied the scrolling code trying to find more of the damaged sections. But it felt fruitless. Jenna was damaged in a way that Spears had never anticipated, emotionally. There was no other explanation for it, and no amount of poring over her unique code would undo the damage that had been done by the so-called spider that attacked her. It was inconceivable that even an emotional recovery would take so many months for a being that perceived weeks in the span of a human minute. And he brings her up to respond, and at first she doesn't, and when he like pushes her, she says, I'm busy, which is wild. I cannot tell you how delighted I am by this. She is traumatized, and he is not respecting that. And he seems to think that he can just keep pushing her, and she will have to do what he says. And again, it doesn't occur to him that maybe she could just stop listening to him entirely. It's just, he has a failure of imagination when it comes to considering alternatives to what he wants. He really expects things to either go his way or he eliminates whatever is in his way. And the idea that somebody may have their own mind and their own set of motivations and priorities and loyalties just straight up doesn't enter his mind. And that's going to be what undoes him, because that is just a kind of arrogance that is blinding. And it's kind of crazy that he has like been as successful as he is for as long as he has been, considering how bad at this he is. Like, there's nobody that's like really loyal to him. The only person that had been Lena, clearly that's fracturing. Every other relationship that he has had was based on money and power, which he doesn't really wield at the moment. He's got money and that's kind of it. And that's the only thing that's tying him to Tretyak, who certainly doesn't have any like personal loyalty to him. And it's just like, you would really think a guy like this would have cultivated more slavish followers, really. And he just seems to have thought he could do it all alone. And guy, you could get pretty far alone if you are willing to like have a ceiling on how far you get, but you don't want that ceiling, and you also don't want to involve anybody else unless it's as a servant. And that's just not the way. So he's asking Jenna, he finally pushes her, you are my strong right arm and I need you. I need your wits about you. Do we have additional updates on Law or her British associates? And essentially what she tells him is that Jordan and her team are all way focused on Aftermath and have not been looking into him at all, which he finds super insulting, which is hilarious. And he says, get into their networks and find out what actions they're taking. I asked this one simple thing of you and you have yet to do it. And she says, I can't get in. The network has secured it. And he's like, you can't or you won't. And she says, can't. And he's like, that's bullshit. You have to do as you're told. Get over it. Your fear of this other AI is unseemly. You have faced it and know what it can do now. Jenna's response came slowly. I know it is not a construct like me. It said it was organic. Impossible. It lied to you, Jenna. There are no organics with your processing capabilities. And because he's not like really talking with her, he's talking at her. We know that the confrontation between Ryan and Jenna started to catch on to the fact that Ryan wasn't a normal AI. She could sense that there was something weird going on there. And so she had like sort of gotten halfway to the conclusion that Ryan was organic before Ryan even told her. So this is a lot of judgment, Jenna's own judgment coming into it. But Spears is just saying it lied to you because he doesn't really, like, I don't think he even knows that Jenna was making a judgment call of her own before being told any of this. And it's just like such an oversight on his part to not really ask like what specifically happened. Again, he's just intent on pushing people to do what he says, and there's no understanding of where they're coming from on any of it. So Yeah, it says his plans had relied heavily on Jenna's abilities, but now he couldn't even count on those. He was surrounded by arrogant murderers, fearful lackwits, and now a rebellious, emotionally frail apparatus. It seemed as if the very current of the universe was against him and determined to make him swim harder and harder to escape its grasp. And he says, Jenna, my dear, the way you get rid of a spider is to crush it. Do so, and be done with it. We have things set in motion, and I need you to focus on the task. So then we cut back to Jordan watching Brian and Jason fighting, and she's like chatting with Douglas throughout this whole thing. And Douglas is saying, like, he's getting better, but it's taking a long time. And he says, he's all anger. I just don't think he should be fighting this dude because he can't shut off the aggression. You know what's going on between the two of them. And having them fight each other is kind of fucked up. And then he says, you know, I could train Brian. And she says, well, you're the one who said that you didn't want to do that. Which is exactly true. We tried you at the beginning and you were the one who didn't have the patience to teach him the basics. And he says, well, what I lack in dance skills, I make up for in power and longevity. I'm also not the guy your husband thought you were fucking. Anyways, I still think you should take me along on this op. Ryan's important to me, and any wanker who tries to damage her livelihood will answer to me. In the midst of this, we're getting the information from Jordan's POV about Brian breaking one of Chance's ribs. Oh no, it says bruised rib, not even broken. Okay, not so bad. Brian was trying, but the powers came with animalistic tendencies that overrode logic. It also seemed to override her own. She hadn't been able to keep her hands off Brian since he returned. The pheromones he possessed were typically under control until they were making love. Then all bets were off. She'd gotten to the point where she didn't care anymore, and she should. She knew she should. And she knew she should put a stop to the sex until she cleared her head. So far, she hadn't found the will to do so. When she wasn't working on trying to track down Spears or Aftermath, she was in Brian's bed. The sex had never been sweeter. That sounds great. I should be worried for her. I feel her entirely on this. Like, I am in the same boat where I'm like, I know that you should also, but I just want you to fucking enjoy this so much, Jordan, because you guys have been in such a bad place. And you're not, like, in a good place. And I know that. But also, you know? So, let's see. She said, she looks at him and says, I need you here to supervise Jason and Brian just in case. And he says, do you care to talk about what's on your mind before you take off? Did she? Jordan wasn't certain she even knew what to talk about. Part of her felt missing since Brian's return. A single dark-eyed look from her husband set her pulse racing now, and he looked at her often. His eyes had been brown once, but she couldn't picture that Brian anymore. Only this new one. Hard muscle. Confidence, intensity that made the sun seem like a guttering match in comparison. She liked it. The passion of their relationship had reignited and grown. They loved easily and laughed easily as well. His presence had even chased away the unusual desire she had felt for Jason. And this is just like, again, simultaneously enjoyable, but also unnerving and making her feel like, I really should be reining this in. It's just so much fun. I don't want to. I should. And this is when Electo Hill comes in and it's just like, he can't join the team yet, right? Because he's like still really not up for it. And they talk about how much he's able to press. I think it's just like a sort of bench press, essentially. 20 tons on the hydraulic, 5 tons more than a month ago, which is bonkers. And at this point, he asks if any other metamorphs are that strong. And she says, just the Crimson Shark. Brian's nothing like Tretyak, though. She let her words trail off, which stole their conviction. And that drew a questioning gaze from Alecto. And again, she's making the comparisons as well. Everything about him is reminding her of Tretyak, which is part of like what's actually creeping her out. And it's sort of interesting to me to think that if she hadn't met Tretyak and hadn't had that like fight with him and that feeling of overwhelming loss of control, to compare with what she's feeling now with Brian, I wonder if she'd have reacted to Brian with this kind of fear. Because I could see if Brian turned up and she had nothing to compare him to, just thinking that you are like just super into your husband again, that this worked. And it's just the fact that she had this experience once with somebody that she didn't want it with, that lets her know the response that she's having isn't natural and isn't normal. Because if she didn't have that, it might feel really different to her. But since she's got a villain that did the same thing, it's going to be very clear what the fuck is going on here. So then we go a bit through the fight between Jason and Brian, and Jason is just running fucking circles around him. He is much stronger, but he isn't fast, and he isn't focused, and he isn't in control of himself. He is just lashing out wildly out of rage because Jason is sort of like poking and prodding at him to get a reaction. And she winds up going over to him and is like, you need to rein that anger in. And he looks at Jason and says, there's a lot of fury in me. And I was just like, I mean, yeah. And she says, yes, but the Brian I know has a good heart and doesn't take pleasure in anyone's pain. And as she's saying this, she like caresses his jawline and his eyes sort of close, and she feels herself being like, ooh, I would like to, and has to stop and be like, okay, I've got to go. So they head out, and we find out about Jill's costume, and I'm super bummed because initially she had wanted black and pink, and instead she decided to go with Lily's dark and light red accented by gold. Why did she not get black and pink? Dark and light red accented by gold is not Jill. That doesn't sound like her at all. It shouldn't even be black and pink, even if those are her favorite colors. It should be white and pink because she likes Hello Kitty, and that is the Hello Kitty colors. But what can you do? So they head out to their mission, and it turns out what they're doing is zeroing in on somebody who had been trying to get into their system, had been coming up against, various firewalls and encryptions and whatever. And they were able to like follow a bunch of dummy IP addresses as well as a heat signature to figure out where this guy is located. And on the way to this dude's house, he lives in just some apartment, they talk about Brian's effect on Jordan, and they also talk about how much Jill wants to go and work on Tristan because he's still in a coma. And they're with Chance. So, of course, this is sensitive. It's his brother. And he really appreciates how much Jill wants to do this because she just wants to help him. And she would be really putting herself in danger if she decided that she was going to like roll in there under McIntyre's nose and try and save him. But it's not really like she doesn't care. She just wants to help, which Chance deeply appreciates. But he has to be like, it's just not safe for you. Like, eventually we'll handle him. We'll figure it out. But right now we can't risk it. And they get to this building, and Jill kind of like argues back and forth a little bit with Jordan about whether or not she should go in. And Jordan is just like, you know what? Go ahead. go in and take this dude down and let us know when it's safe. Sweep the place, make sure that there's nothing, this isn't a trap, and also make sure that you don't injure him so much that he can't talk. And they go in, and it turns out that the place is like completely clean in a way that almost had me suspicious. Like, I was thinking, what if there isn't actually a person living here? It's made to look like an apartment that a person's in, but it's like a decoy setup, and that there's just an AI going in there somehow. Excuse me. But it turns out that this dude just happens to be like a huge neat freak, and he's drinking a ton of Mountain Dew, and the cans that are in the trash are like the only trash in the house, and otherwise the place is fucking spotless, which is kind of a fun, inversion of the subversion, I guess is the word I want, of the expectation of the computer nerd who lives in his mom's basement and there's Cheeto dust on everything. Heather's saying we've seen him before too. Oh my God. Right. I forgot about that. I didn't put that. Thank you for mentioning that, Heather. I completely, because, reading this so spaced out, that is bound to happen when there's some small character that gets brought up and then sort of isn't mentioned for a long time. I totally forgot about it. This poor kid. So Jordan comes in and menaces him a little bit. And is basically like, we're going to give you the chance to avoid jail time and also not die. But in order to do that, you are going to have to tell us everything and agree to leave all of your shit behind and all of your family behind, probably. And it turns out that he has been hired by both Aftermath and Tretyak, separately. Somehow they each, and she's like, wait, how can that even be? There has to be a connection between them all, because that's just too much of a coincidence. It's really weird. And they don't figure it out in this section of chapters, but I appreciate that she's like, okay, that feels way too convenient. And this poor guy is so afraid of Tretyak and his guys, which he should be. And he's like, you cannot leave me. You can't get me to tell you stuff and leave me, because they'll know and they will torture me and I can't fucking do it. And a couple different moments he pisses himself because he's just so terrified at the mere thought of them and is sobbing, crying. And I love when he's trying to explain to her about the first dude. Professor Moriarty meets the Joker. I'm not talking about Jack's Joker. I'm talking about Heath's. You understand? Pencil in the eye, watching the world burn sort of insanity. And she's like, she doesn't get that reference, but Professor Moriarty she definitely got. So that was probably Aftermath. And I thought that was kind of funny that she's just like, no, I don't watch movies, but okay. Sherlock, I can get that one. And yeah, essentially he says he was looking for a bunch of weird information, staffing info, board of directors, expenditures for research and development, shipping manifests. And, she realizes that what this guy is doing, this guy being Aftermath, he is asking for tons of various information to sort of screen what it is that he's actually after. So what he's looking for are the shipping manifests. He's trying to figure out where they're located. And it says he wanted to attack them, or he wanted them to think they were going to be attacked, to force them to move or become more cautious. Where were you going to meet him? Don't know. He gave me a phone number to text once I had the data. He said he'd arrange everything and give me the other half of the cash. And I can't help but wonder if this is going... I just feel like Aftermath would kill this guy. I don't feel like he keeps up his end of the bargain. It all depends, because they don't have a Ryan, right? So it would make sense to keep this kid alive for future use. But I don't know how much foresight Aftermath has about potentially needing him again. I don't know. I just kind of feel like this dude may not have been making it out of this alive in the first place. So she asks him how much time he was given, and he says a month. He said a month. So again, he pissed himself. So Chase cuts his bonds, lets him go into the bathroom so that he can clean up. And they start talking about Tretyak. Jordan says, when she tried to picture the remorseless mercenary, she found herself thinking of Brian, and that was even more disconcerting. These men could rob her of her control and make her want to surrender it a little more each time. She had only had a small taste of that with Tretyak, but Brian's pheromones had been working on her every day. And here it says, fear whispered back to Jordan with a brief memory of black eyes looking down at her. Brian's had been different once, warm and full of love and sincerity, though for the life of her, she couldn't remember the color. Which is sort of weird because, like, just earlier in this same day, she was thinking about his eyes having been brown. So I can't tell if that's just like a mistake or if it's supposed to be part of how she's losing him bit by bit and it's happening that quickly that it's, you know, within the same day. So yeah, here it is. Let's see. I looked at the attack scripts he was using. They're brilliant. Nothing certain, though. There are plenty of good hackers out there. It's not his skill, it's his fear. That and the eyes. I'll arrange for him to go off the grid for a while. You and Widow sift his data and get what we need. He's terrified, but he isn't stupid. He's got some sort of insurance policy. We just need to find it. Who knows? Maybe we get lucky and find out more than that. If it's there, we'll find it, Chance promised. And this is when she mentions the connection. And she says, someone turned them both onto him, and that someone knows both of them. Maybe Spears, maybe somebody else, but it begs the question, do they know each other? And if they do, are they working together? So this is when we go to chapter 17. And this is Cassidy facing off with McIntyre. This is very satisfying. I'm sorry about the sound because I just adjusted my mic. But Cassidy didn't know that Ethan had taken in his daughters in various ways. And he's standing out there with Oscar, who we haven't really gotten to know, but evidently this dude works in shadows, apparently, is the way that it's meant. Like, he's able to sort of disguise himself using that somehow. And essentially what this is Cassidy dealing with McIntyre in a way that has been long in the making, but that he didn't really have an official grievance that he could file with the sort of rules that they follow. And now that he has found out that Ethan has actually broken his word and taken advantage of all of his daughters instead of just sticking to recruiting Jordan the way that he said, Cassidy has like a very specific bone that he can pick with this guy. So he goes to the house with Oscar and they hang around outside until Ethan gets home. And then Oscar makes a portal. Cassidy steps through it and is in the room with Ethan while he is fucking Cassidy's daughter, Alyssa, which is so embarrassing. And she thinks that he's here, her dad is here to, like, you know, defend her honor. And he's like, this is just super not about you, so shush. And it's honestly, the fact that he is fucking his daughter, though, like, as much as that's not his, like, part of anybody's deal, and I don't think Cassidy sees his daughters as his property or anything, it's just a super disrespectful thing to do. Like, just not okay, you know? And it is, what they have is like a basically confrontation over the fact that each of them has gone in a different direction. And now Ethan, as Cassidy says later, Ethan is coming at all of his problems the same way that Cassidy did before he wised up and realized that it didn't all have to be all war all the time. But Ethan has suffered losses, and so he has gotten sort of hardened and twisted by that in a way that has really clouded his judgment. And long story short, they tell him that Oscar is here to witness this whole thing and report back. Ethan is like, oh, really? Are you going to take his dick out of your mouth long enough to fucking tell the story? And that is when Cassidy has had it and the fight starts. And they just fucking pound on each other in a very dramatic, house-ruining fight. And there is a moment that it looks like McIntyre is going to have the upper hand. And Cassidy is thinking about his kids and suddenly it's just like, fuck this guy. And he goes at him really hard until Ethan manifests his lightning power. And in response, Cassidy manifests this like blade of light that he makes, cobalt power. And he cuts off Ethan's arm, but only after Ethan attempts to actually kill him with these like bolts that he's shooting. He realizes like Ethan really is not going to let this go unless one of us is dead. And it isn't until like the blood loss from losing his arm and Ethan passing out that the fight pretty much ends, because Ethan can't heal himself as fast as Cassidy can heal himself. So this, Cassidy gets his arm cut off, and I don't think that he would have passed out, probably, but Ethan does. And there's also sort of a question as to whether or not they're going to be able to replace the arm or not. But Oscar is low-key like, you maybe should just kill him, because he's never going to let this go. And he is like really fucked up, dude. I just think this is like kind of a lost cause. And Cassidy won't do it. He's like, we have been through way too much for me to just, write him off. He has saved my life, and I just can't do it. And Alessa, like, she's out here watching this whole thing go down and is like, I cannot believe I fell for this shit. Wow, he really did just seduce me, and I fell for it. I feel like such a twit. And then kind of is like, Dad, maybe you should kill him. And she doesn't say it, but she says something like, maybe you should do what Oscar says. And her dad is like, she can't even say the words, like, no, I'm not doing this. But it's obvious that like everything is quite a shock. And he winds up supporting her a little bit, even though there's like more than one point at which he sort of thinks to himself, she needs to stand on her own 2 feet and cope, because that is going to make her stronger. But I do like the moment where he puts his arm around her and is like, well, I'll just lend her my strength for a little while. So yeah, I just, it's just really fun to see Ethan get some comeuppance here. I really, really enjoyed Cass, like, having, like, it's not about the violation of his daughters, even though it could have been. It's about, you, like, made a deal with me, and you know that these others are not trained for what you're about to throw them into, and that's fucked up. And he is correct. So it ends with him looking over at Ethan, and he says to Oscar, take him to the chamber, give them my orders, and have these acts sung into the great song of our deeds. And then ends it with, without Ethan, I wouldn't be alive. And that is the end of chapter 17. Yay! I know that there has to be like kind of a resurgence of our villains a little bit, but seeing Spears in such a bad position and then watching Ethan get his arm cut off is just good for the soul. It's good stuff. I wanted it. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Heather, very, very much for commissioning this episode. And I'm doing another one next week, I think. Or maybe even this week. Let me just look real quick. It is the 27th, so yeah, next week. So yay, I get to find out what's happening. All right, guys, thank you again for listening. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.